Hello, James Flatten here with the Minnesota Space Grant. And I'd like to talk a little bit about preparing balloons for inflation for stratospheric balloon flights. In this case, latex weather balloons. Let me share my screen and show pictures of where we're headed. So basically, here is a balloon being inflated. I'm not going to inflate an actual balloon in this demonstration, but I will show you how to prepare for this process. You'll notice there are several people, in this case, standing around the balloon, holding it, trying to keep it from moving with the wind. And in particular, one person at the base of the balloon, at the neck of the balloon, holding the hose in the balloon. And the balloon is also, if I scroll in a little bit here, the balloon is also tied to the ground. In this case, they've tied it to some weights. I would actually prefer to tie that to a person, but one way or another, some sort of a string, a safety string to attach the balloon to something heavy on the ground in advance of attaching the actual flight equipment to the balloon. Usually I don't attach the flight equipment until the balloon is completely ready and sealed, ready to fly. So let me show you how to prepare for this. Actually, before doing so, let me just go to a couple more pictures. Here is the same balloon, here's the same balloon, and there it is. There's the balloon, fully inflated. This particular balloon was going to lift a stack that was just under 12 pounds. And so we had about 18 pounds of neck lift in this balloon. This is as big as I go. Basically, you're allowed to go above 12 pounds if you get special permission. But for my team, I always say, let's keep it under 12 pounds, in which case our balloons never get any larger than this. Okay, so let me show you what I have with me today. First of all, here's the remnants of a balloon that has flown. And this is what we're headed. We're headed towards preparing a balloon so that there is some sort of a attachment point and it's well covered so it doesn't damage the balloon itself. And I even have this using a key ring attached to a string, which I would tie to something, perhaps a person. So that's my safety line to the ground. I'll go through how to prepare a balloon with such a hard tie point. But before I do, let me just show you some of the stuff I have with me. So first of all, for this process, I'm going to need some zip ties, something to cut zip ties with. I'll use electrical tape, something to cut that with. Here is a piece of PVC. This will go inside the neck of the balloon and serve to be the hard tie point. And some string. Okay, I'll explain what this string is for in a moment. Other things I have with me include a tarp, a couple different regulators. Here's a very simple regulator. It doesn't have any gauges on it. My preference is to use a regulator that shows the tank pressure and the delivery pressure. But in either case, in both cases, there's some sort of a hose and a plastic hose extra part that will stick inside of the balloon. Okay, so that's what's going to go into the balloon. I also have with me a fish scale so as to be able to measure how hard the balloon is pulling. Here's some nitrile gloves. And I think that's almost everything. Oh, one more thing I have with me. I have a few more balloon necks. It turns out if you're going to prepare a balloon, what you will do will differ just a little bit depending on what kind of balloon you're using. So let me just show you. Here is the remnants of a 1,500 gram K-mont balloon. Here's the remnants of a 3,000 gram K-mont balloon. They don't look very different because most of the balloon is missing, except that the necks are slightly different in diameter. On the other hand, there's another company that I prefer, in fact, called Hwoyee. Here is a remnants of a 1,600 gram Hwoyee balloon. And the major difference, as you can see, is that the neck is much bigger. And so depending on the size of the neck, that will influence, a little bit at least, how you try to attach your hard tie point. So I'm going to work with this kind of balloon. Just some vocabulary. Consider this part the neck of the balloon. This is the thick rubber part. And then starting about here and going beyond that, so that will be up during the flight, this is the very thin rubber. And in fact, apparently, I've never tested this, the oils in your skin can potentially damage the thin rubber. So that's why we wear gloves, at least anybody who's going to be touching the neck above the neck. The person touching the neck, perhaps it's optional to wear gloves. And of course, if you're trying to minimize your exposure to latex, don't choose latex gloves. So these are nitrile gloves. You can also use vinyl gloves, but probably not latex gloves. Okay, so to explain what's going on here, I will work through on a mock balloon, and then I'm going to work through on a real balloon, okay? So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take my hard tie point. I'm going to put it inside of the neck of the balloon up to the top of the neck, but not to the thin part. And then I'm going to wrap the balloon over that, over on itself, which basically means I can still see it in there. And that means I can still get a hose in there and inflate the balloon, okay? And the reason I go all the way up to the top of the neck is so that the rest of it can potentially fold over and get sealed. That's the seal. The seal is after you fold the bottom part over, that if your hard tie point is too far toward the bottom, then you won't be able to do that. I do know people who just squeeze this and call that sealed. I prefer to fold it over, even though it's a little bit harder to do so. I think it produces a better result. Okay, now we just have to make sure that we have strings attached to the hard tie point. They will be outside of the rubber. So the way that's going to work is I'm going to take a piece of string. In fact, let me start with a piece of string that doesn't have any knots in it at all, and just show you where I'm headed, okay? So first, on each end of the piece of string, I'm going to put a loop. So I take the string, I fold it over my hand until I have essentially something the width of my 4 fingers, and then I put a knot in that, producing a loop. Okay, so there's one loop. And then I could do the same on the other end, and then I could fold it in half and do the same in the middle. And when all is said and done, I'll end up with this device. It's got knots at each end and one knot in the middle. So what we're going to do is we're going to feed a zip tie through both of these, and then all the way around the neck, around the hard tie point, and then another one, and then we'll cover that with tape after clipping the zip ties. And then we'll inflate it, and then we'll fold it, and we'll put more zip ties on and cover them with tape. And ultimately, this thing will be dangling down, and that's where I attach my payload string. But even before I start inflating, I'm going to definitely tie this to the ground, either with a carabiner, or in this case, I just used a key ring, just a split key ring that's easy to remove. That's where we're headed. Let's actually do it with a real balloon, not just the neck of a balloon, the remnants of a balloon. So here I have in a box, but it's been out of a box once before, so it looks a little different from brand new. If this was brand new, this would be wrapped in paper. So basically it's inside of a plastic bag, and then there's a paper wrapping. The paper wrapping has been taken off of this balloon. And so if I look in here, I can see the neck. There's the neck, and I can see the thin part. I'm not going to touch that part, but as long as I only touch the neck, then I don't bother wearing gloves. This is the prepping the balloon part, and I would typically do this on the flight line, although one could do this in advance. I like to do it on the flight line so that people who are attending a flight can see what I'm up to. Okay, so here we go, working only on the neck. So I'm going to just only have the neck sticking out, and I'm going to kind of keep the rest of it inside the bag and protected. Here comes my hard tie point. Install it inside the neck up to the top of the neck, but not so far as hitting the thin part. A little bit too far. There we go. Okay, right there. Okay, and now I'm going to wrap it on itself. Okay, now I'm going to pull out my attachment string, grab it from the part that's going to attach to the payload, and it's the other end where I want to put my zip ties through. One zip tie through both loops. There they go. And then I'm wrapping this around kind of high. High as in toward the balloon. Fairly high on the hard tie point. I'll zip that up. Be careful, this is pointy. Don't get this close to the balloon. You might puncture something. I'm going to take those two and I'm going to move them approximately 180 degrees apart from each other. Okay. I'm going to take another zip tie and run it right through exactly the same thing. So in other words, these zip ties are completely duplicative. This is redundancy. If one were to fail, the other one would exactly do the same job. Okay. So now I have two zip ties right next to each other, both of which are prepared to do the same thing, and that is hold both of these loops, this loop and this loop. And so if I pull hard, I shouldn't be able to get that off of there. Do pull this sort of as tight as you can, and then clip it as closely as you can. I would suggest diagonal cutters, not scissors for this part. Don't let anything get close, anything sharp get close to the balloon itself. Now, those actually feel very smooth, but sometimes those are jagged, and even if they feel smooth, I'm definitely going to cover them up with tape. So here's electrical tape. I'm going to go over it several times. If those were jagged, it could even go through the electrical tape. So 3 or 4 layers thick. Okay, there it is. Now, frankly, this is now prepped. This is ready for inflation, but I'm going to finish it. I'm going to do the rest of it without actually putting any helium in. So now that this is ready for inflation, I'm going to tie it to the ground. Let me point out one more thing. Notice that the tape here doesn't cover the bottom of the loop. I can still get my finger inside of that loop right there. And the reason I like to do that is when it comes time to try to measure the lift using a scale, I like to grab on either here or perhaps down at the bottom, but up here is my preference. That allows me to see how much the balloon is trying to pull. And while that's happening, make sure that no one is touching the balloon, especially the people around the sides who might be pushing on the balloon and keeping it out of the wind. Do this when the wind is as calm as possible, stay out of the wind if possible, and just tell everybody, okay, hands off the balloon, now I'm going to make my measurement. So in that particular case, turn on your device while it's lying flat. And what that means is it reads 0 now. And so now that it's hanging, it actually reads its own weight. But of course, the balloon has to lift this weight first. And so it's appropriate that the weight shows up. And then as the balloon pulls more and more and more, I get 3 pounds, I get 10 pounds, et cetera, okay? So now that the balloon is prepped, here is my safety line coming along. And when it comes time to fly, I will put on the stack first and remove the safety line second. So at no point is the balloon completely attached to something. You might be inclined, this is not a good idea. I speak from experience. You might be inclined just to hold on to the balloon as best you can while you're inflating it. The problem is balloons are slippery, and if the wind comes up or anything like that, it's easy to slip out of your fingers, and then you've just lost more than $100 worth of balloon, probably well over $100 worth of lifting gas. Okay, so now that it's tied to the ground, now it's time to inflate. So I would bring over my inflating nozzle. I would leave this thing in the bag, in the box, and then tell people, okay, the people who are going to control the balloon, take it out of the box without putting it on the ground, ever. So right now, notice the balloon is in a bag. It's not even on the table, okay? And so hold it above the ground without touching. As many people as you need, 2 is a minimum, probably more than 2 would be useful. Okay, and then eventually when you inflate it, the balloon will hold itself up and you can just stand around it and try to keep it from moving. But at the very beginning, you really need to keep the balloon off the ground. Don't lay it on your tarp. Your tarp is clean, supposedly, but there could be sharp things on your tarp, natural or unnatural things. Don't want to have the balloon touch anything that's not ultra smooth like nitrile gloves. Okay, so the person who's dealing with the bottom of it needs to look in the bottom here. This is folded over, but then there is the place where I can see the hard tie point. So I'm going to stick this right in there. And it turns out, this is kind of a mistake actually, it turns out that my hard tie point mates with this. But I would suggest you don't, in fact, push the 2 together. And the reason is if you push the 2 together, when it comes time to pull this out, which you want to do while you're making your lift measurements, you might inadvertently pull out your hard tie point. Guess what? No more balloon after that. It flies away, okay? Because the ties are to the hard tie point, not exactly to the balloon. There's just a frictional connection between the two. So my recommendation to the people who handle the base of my balloons is put this in until you're touching the hard tie point. So I'm clicking against it, and then don't even push it in any farther. And then make the seal right here. And then that's your full responsibility. Holding on to the hose, holding on to the balloon, holding on to the safety line, perhaps wrapped around your leg or your foot. And other people are responsible for the balloon inflated part itself. And then when it comes time to make the measurement, pull this out. If it happens to be quite inflated and lots of helium is coming out, you might fold this over temporarily and make your measurement. And then if you need more, stick it back in and continue. Okay, so now let's assume that we've made our measurement. And if I had, let's say I had an 8-pound total stack, everything to be lifted is 8 pounds, not including the balloon. Okay, so when you inflate a balloon, I think of it as enough helium to fill the balloon so it lifts itself, and then enough helium to lift whatever needs to be lifted, in this case 8 pounds of stuff. But if you let go then, or if you seal and let go, it just wanders around. It doesn't actually go up. So then you need excess lift, and the excess lift might be approximately 50% of the stack weight. So if I had an 8-pound stack, I'd be inclined to put 12 pounds of total neck lift into the balloon. Balloon lifts itself, and it lifts 8 pounds of stack, and it has 4 pounds more to make sure it goes up when I let it go. So let's say that I've made my measurement and I'm at 12 pounds. That's great, because that measurement is measuring the total neck lift. Now it's time to extract that, fold this over without losing much helium, so be quick about it. And then I'm going to put more zip ties on. I put the first zip ties on sort of high. That gives me the bottom half approximately to put the extra zip ties on. Those ones don't necessarily need to go through those loops. They could, but I don't usually bother. And I'm going to put this on here. These zip ties are a little on the short side, so if necessary, you could daisy chain the zip ties. Let's see if I can do this. Could be possible. These happen to be 8-inch zip ties. This would be more comfortable to be doing with 11-inch zip ties or 14-inch zip ties for this particular hard tie point size. There we go. Starts to click. Okay, that's one. I'm going to put a second one on. Again, just parallel to the first one, so it just does the same job. Just in case that first one were to somehow snap or something like that. Here in Minnesota, this can happen, especially if it's wintertime. Zip ties in cold weather don't play well together. Okay, so here's my second zip tie. Now I'm going to clip those both off, very short. Now, perhaps unnecessary, but I think a good idea, I'm going to cover up those points as if they were sharp. The balloon is above me and should never contact this part, but I think it's a good idea. Okay, so now that I've got like 3 layers over those potentially sharp points, now I'm going to actually wrap the tape up until I've completely covered all of the neck, which I got folded over. So a little bit higher. In fact, I sometimes say it's the tape, not the zip ties, that seals it. I'm not sure if that's really true. It's a good story. Okay, so now I've got tape all the way up, and so there's no exposed folded over part. It's completely underneath the tape. And I'll clip it, making sure I don't get my scissors anywhere close to the thin part of the balloon, any part of the balloon, frankly. And there it is, ready to fly. So what would I do next? So the balloon is up, the balloon is above me, the balloon is pulling. Whoever's going to be down here might be getting tired by this point. They can hold on to this part, they can hold on to this part both. And then when it comes time to fly, what I would do is I would attach the stack to this small loop in the middle here. I don't attach it anywhere. And the reason is if you attach it up here, it could literally wander up and down. And eventually you could end up with your stack attached like way up here. This is a bad place. So if I put it into this loop, at least the loop keeps it in the middle of the string. So I attach the stack there. Perhaps that's the parachute at the top of the stack. So you might end up attaching a string that goes to the top of the parachute would be attached here. And then the rest of the payload stack should already be attached together before you put this here. In fact, I think you should do that before you inflate the balloon in the first place. Okay, now's the time, if you haven't already done so, to turn on all payloads, seal all payloads. And then when you are ready to fly, then you would remove the safety line, holding on tight. So remove the safety line. So now that's off. Keep a hold on this, and then stand as you are able to or planning to, and then release the balloon, either by lifting the balloon one payload at a time and releasing it from the bottom. You can do that if it's not windy, or if it's windy, you might need to have the people each with one payload in hand underneath the payloads, downwind of the balloon, and then release the balloon. The balloon will overfly each person and tell them, don't drop it, let it be picked vertically out of your hands. And if it's not ready to be picked vertically when the balloon comes by, you need to run. You need to run with the balloon, stay under the balloon until it picks it out of your hands. The person at the far end of the line is the person who has to run the farthest. There you have it, prepping a balloon for stratospheric flight.